Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back. Okay, so we're continuing our discussion on um, how we look at doing this research and how we compile it and how we create that ethnography, that story of a people. Okay, so we talked about doing the analysis. Um, One of the things that we have to talk about is how anthropologists in the past have done this, right? How have we written that ethnography? And how does that impact different communities, right? So in the field of anthropology, especially if we go back in time to sort of modern anthropologists, so 1920s era when Boas and Bronislaw Malinowski really changed British and American anthropology. Um, we started seeing who the people were that were creating those ethnographies, right? Prior to this, most often than not, it was European or American white males that were doing this kind of research. They're the ones that had the access to education. They're the ones that had the interest in doing it, and so they had that opportunity, the privilege of being able to go out and conduct ethnographies. They also came with it a certain level of bias, of interest. A lot of anthropologists were out there looking for reasons to justify certain behavior, right? We talked a little bit about that before. And Boas himself was interested in phrenology, which is the sort of like the shape of the human skull and how the shape of it would influence behavior and personality and intelligence. And this was a big part of his research early on in his career until he got to the point where he realized, yeah, this doesn't have any impact on a culture, right? The shape of their skull doesn't really matter. But it had been used as a means by lots of other researchers and then other institutions as a means for justifying behavior towards those groups, right? That's important to understand. That's a part of that history. Why, again, going back in time, when we had Otabenga, who was purchased as a slave, brought to the United States, and put into the Bronx Zoo, all in the name of research, right? Those kinds of ideas have been an influence, but we are trying to go around that now, right? We've learned different ways of doing it, taking in human agency, making sure that the research that we do isn't going to harm anyone, right? If we think about how a lot of this stuff has been published, most ethnographies have been published as a book or part of a journal. Again, that format oftentimes is coming directly from the anthropologist, their perspective, their beliefs, their findings. They're the trained ones, right? And that's been the standard for many years. Now we're starting to see more of a change. And a lot of that has to do with technology. It also has to do with a change in education, in which we are looking at including the voices of the people that we're working with, the people that we're studying, and they become a participant in the research. They become not only a person to be researched, but a researcher, right? They add their voice to it. And that's a really awesome way of approaching things, right? Making sure that the people that you're doing that research is a part of it. And this is where we come to polyvocality. Polyvocality basically meaning multiple voices. Okay, so in a lot of research, especially today. That's one of the things that we really have to pay attention to, is that I'm going to be talking about you. I'm going to be studying you, and whatever I put out there is a representation of you. Should you not have a voice in that research? To give you an example, when I was doing my thesis work for graduate school, I was doing a documentary film on graffiti writers. Now, in this process, while I'm going out and I'm interviewing these folks, talking to them about what their lives are like and why they do the things that they do, I came back with all of that information. I came back with 40 hours worth of interviews and footage. And I had to turn that into a 30-minute video. So 40 minutes had to be condensed into 40 hours had to be condensed into 30 minutes. So now I have to tell a story. Right? I have to put this research together that makes sense. So I start putting all these pieces together. And while I'm doing that, I'm sending out copies to the people that I've been working with. And I said, hey, watch this. Tell me what you think. Is this a good representation of what you believe? And I would get notes back. And they'd say, I like this. Can you take this out? Right? This I don't think is appropriate. Or, this is challenging, but yeah, this is a part of our culture. This is a part of this. And you include them in the research. Not only that, but just the fact that you're hearing their voices, right? A couple of examples when the film that you guys are going to be, one of the films you're going to be watching, Dead Birds. The anthropologist, Robert Gardner, goes out and basically tells this story about this culture, right? And he becomes the voice for that culture. You see Pua and Wyack as these two characters within this film, but you never hear their actual voices. You never hear them contributing to the conversation, to their knowledge, right, that you're getting. All you're hearing is sort of this oftentimes poetic description of what's going on in the mind of Pua, right? And what are the things that he hopes to be as when he grows up to be a man. Now, everything that Gardner is saying could absolutely be true, without a doubt, 100%. Everything he's saying could absolutely be true. The problem is there's not a lot of authenticity to it. You don't actually hear Pua talking about what's going on in his life. You just hear Gardner's description of it. And that creates a sort of a false sense of security when it comes to that knowledge, right? You trust the anthropologist, but you don't trust the people that you're working with. Now, granted, at the time that this was filmed, it wasn't always easy to do that, right? And so we take that into consideration, right? Being able to use the sound that's available. Maybe there's bad sound. Maybe they didn't have the technology. But you don't hear their voices. And that's important to keep in mind, that people that are being researched, that are part of this idea, this program, this project, their voices have to be heard. And they have to have that authority. And you can put up contradictory things, right? You can say in your research, hey, this person didn't agree with this, and this person didn't agree with that, and then say that there is conflict. You don't have to say which one is right or wrong. You just go with it. Yeah, conflict. It happens all the time. Polyvocality, extremely important to understand. And because it's important to understand, you need to understand the complications of it. Okay, so what would be some of the benefits and some of the complications of letting people tell their own stories? I want you to think about this for a few minutes, write something down. I'll just pause for a sec. Okay, let's talk about it. People are sometimes motivated to do certain things for certain reasons, whatever those reasons are. If people are given an opportunity to share their thoughts, their own lives, they can sometimes sugarcoat it. They can sometimes make it seem better than what it actually is. Sometimes because you get that opportunity to get your name out there, get that prestige, guess what happens? People are going to put themselves into a better light. That's just a reality, right? So we have to take that into consideration. How would they benefit from this kind of exposure? So that could be both a complication as to the information that you're getting. And that is also something that you just have to deal with on a regular basis when you're doing research. You know, if people are going to be sharing information, what are they sharing? How is it going to benefit them? People usually don't like to share the things that make them look bad, right? Things that you have to take into consideration. Okay. Then we're going to talk about reflexivity. And this is the part in which the researcher becomes a part of the research. We have to understand that our own thoughts and experiences influence the work that we do. So we have to understand our own motivations, our own reasoning for doing this. This is why when we're taking field notes, we take 2 notebooks and record not only what we're finding, but how we're finding it. What is our state of mind when we're finding that information out? We are including ourselves in the research because our perspective is important, right? If I'm working in a community and I'm interested in oh God, anything to do with women, okay? Women might not share with me what they might share with another woman. They might not share to the same degree or to the extensive knowledge that they might have with someone that looks like me, behaves like me. And that's something that I have to take into consideration. Not because they don't like me, not because I said something wrong, but just because of who I am, right? And the circumstances that I find myself in. My age might push me out of what younger generations would want to share. Or maybe I haven't aged enough to learn what that older generation holds as secret or valuable. So we have to take into those sort of various things that could influence someone's behavior when we're trying to do research, right? So we take that into account. And a lot of times when we do that, we also bring in people. You know, if I'm looking at understanding that aspect of a community, I will plan ahead and bring someone with me to help deal with those issues, so that they can better relate to that group of people. Ethnographic authority. What gives us the right to go into another culture and learn about it and then write about it and share that information? that's a tough question, right? Part of it is the fact that we want to help educate, right? We want to educate people. We want to understand other folks and why they do the things that they do. We go out, we get an education on how to do it properly, how to do it safely, not only for ourselves, but for everyone involved. These are tough questions, right? And, you know, how I've dealt with it is like, you know, if I can learn more about another community, maybe I can have an impact in which that community doesn't experience hardship, right? Or can someone can gain a better understanding. That's why I teach, right? Is hopefully I can provide that experience, and that's what gives me that authority, right? And that authority also comes from the work that you've done, right? You've accomplished these things. You're doing these things. You've got a lot of experience out in the field. You've seen the mistakes. You've dealt with them. You've learned from them, and then you move on, right? So that experience comes with it. And then you are also usually up in front of your peers. You write a book. You write an entry into a journal. You create a film. It's reviewed by your peers, and your peers are like, hey, good job, or hey, what about this? You know, and how do you deal with that? So there's people that'll keep you in check, right, to make sure that you are doing a good job. And that's a part of science in general, is that peer review. And nothing's ever perfect, but it helps. Then you have folks that are engaged anthropologists, and this is oftentimes working with applied anthropology, in which you see an issue that's going on in the world. How can you make the world a better place, right? You take the information that you've learned and you engage in activities that help to create that change. Cultural anthropology in general, as a science, often takes sort of like a very scientific approach. We don't always engage. We want the knowledge, and we want to share that knowledge, but we might not always take an active role in any sort of cultural change as a cultural agent. However, like applied anthropology, engaged anthropologists will oftentimes take what they have learned and then use that knowledge to create social change, to deal with the issues that might be within that community. So they're not anthropologists, cultural anthropologists in the traditional sense, but they become agents of change. And so that also brings us to like ethical concerns. What are things that we should think about? Again, there's this concept of do no harm. The American Anthropological Association, the AAAs, have created sort of like a series of guidelines for us to think about when we're out doing research. What are the things that we need to do to make sure that nobody gets hurt, nobody is exploited in any way? And this helps us sort of navigate a lot of those issues, especially because we're dealing with people, and people are complicated. When you're doing your research, you have to obtain informed consent. And what that means is that they know exactly what you're doing with the information that you're taking from them. I'm going out there to do research, and I'm talking to these people. They need to know that I'm doing research. I can't just kind of sit there and have a conversation and not tell them that I'm interested in their culture and their lives. I have to tell them, it's like, hey, I'm doing research. I want to know more. Tell me more, but this is what I'm going to do with it, right? And you have totally the right to say yes or no, right? So you can't exploit them. You have to let them have the respect that is earned by being a participant, right? We also try to ensure anonymity when anonymity is necessary or wanted. And that's to make sure that the people that we're working with can remain safe. Sometimes, when we're doing this research, we learn things that could cause people harm if that information gets out. So we have to make sure that whenever we're dealing with those sort of issues, that nobody is going to be harmed by learning that or sharing that information. And that can be complicated sometimes. Deciding what that information is and how we should deal with it. It's never easy. And it's not usually too common that you run into those sort of circumstances, but it does happen. So we will do stuff like, change names of the participants. We might do whatever we need to do to make sure that those folks stay safe. And then the conclusion to all this, right? There's an art and a science to fieldwork. And we have to understand both and how they interwork with each other. The science of finding out that information and the art of acting upon that process. How do you engage in those communities and how do you engage with individuals? We've looked at the different types of information and how we organize it, the quantitative and qualitative, the emic and the edic, participant observation, life histories, kinship analysis. All of those things are different ways that we look at information and gain that information. Understanding how things are organized, right? The map, right? How